Now, big story of the day in the early hours was Argentina. Argentina failed to strike a deal to avert its second default in more than 12 years. This morning, Andrew Canter, Chief Investment Officer at Future Growth, joins us for more. He's in Cape Town. Andrew, I just want to read you something here. It says from the FT, it's about 3 o'clock this afternoon. It says, Argentina's government reacted furiously to the country's second default in 13 years, while investors retained hope for a resolution to the long debt standoff. Argentina's saying they haven't defaulted. It's all to do with those nasty Americans and hedge funds, etc. What is the situation?
So it's a really interesting situation. If there's such a thing as a righteous default, this may well be it. Here you've got these vulture funds, hedge fund guys who picked up Argentinian debt in default, probably at very small cents on the rand, and they pursued sort of a 12-year legal battle to try and get 100 cents on the rand, while all the other 93% of the lenders had come to some agreement to accept a discount to move on in the world. And it's been a long and bitter battle, both legal and practical. I mean, at various points, these guys tried to seize the president's airplane on the ground. I think it was in Europe. They seized a Navy ship of the Argentinians in port in Africa to try and get this money. And basically, the Argentinians have exhausted every legal defense, and it's gone right up to the U.S. Supreme Court, who refused to hear the case and said, pay the money. But the Argentinians are saying, I'm not going to let 3 guys in an office in New York hold me to ransom as a nation. It's a sovereignty issue.
The credit rating agencies, the financial agents, this is an Argentinian quote, by the way, the financial agents and opinionators who are trying to say that Argentina is in a supposed technical default are playing an absurd hoax that is aimed at destroying the restructuring process of Argentina debt. The market doesn't believe there's been a default. The stock market's up 60% this year. The economy is much healthier than it was in 2001, and the bond market clawing its way back. Andrew?
So again, as part of the story, so you end up with a situation where these few guys are trying to demand to get paid, and there's other debt that had to be paid on June 30th. And the Argentinians took the money to pay that debt to the legitimate borrowers, lenders, on June 30th. They put it in a bank in New York, and a judge in New York said, no, you can't pay that out to these lenders because you refused to honor these 12-year-old conflicted claims. And as a consequence, Argentina says they paid, and they have, but the money hasn't been released. Technically, they're in default, and that's why the ratings agents called it a selective default, I think, or a limited default. Be that as it may, it is a technical default. The country is in default, and it will affect their ability to borrow money.
How bad will that impact be of that downgrade? How will they lose a lot more money with regard to capital raising initiatives?
Well, let's take a top-down view world first. When Argentina defaulted 12 years ago, they were about 20% of the JP Morgan Emerging Markets Bond Index. They're now about 1.3% or something like that. So it's not a material issue in the world, and everybody knows this is just a bit of a bun fight over a specific issue. So the world is not going to react. As far as the Argentinians go, look, when elephants fight, it's the grass that gets squashed, right? And so that's what's happening. I mean, it will affect the economy eventually, but there's ways around this as well. They can play legal actions. This is a U.S. jurisdiction legal issue. They can borrow elsewhere in the world as long as people will lend to them, and they probably will. People like me who are lenders, kind of, well, rationally, I should come down on the side of the investors. Sanctity of contract should prevail. On the other hand, I think it's a bit rapacious of what's going on here and the behaviors. I mean, these guys aren't due this money, is my view. There was no collective action clause to protect the Argentinians that would force them to follow along. There is, and this is probably the big issue, by the way. In normal bankruptcy, you as an individual, you get into deep trouble. There's a legal process you can go through to be rehabilitated. Your lenders who were irresponsible in the first place take their lumps, and you move on in life. There is nothing like that for countries. There is no bankruptcy law for sovereigns. So you end up with the population, the next generation, paying off the last generation's claims sold by irresponsible bankers to irresponsible governments. It's really an unfair system.
Isn't it really a bit of a cautionary tale, too? I mean, you see, I pulled up the currency chart today on the Argentinian peso, and it went from 1 to 1 to 1 to 3 the last time they defaulted, 1 to 4 thereabouts. A little bit of a break, and then it's gotten quite a bit worse here now. I think it's about 1 to 8 or thereabouts. Inflation has run up on the back of that. I think it's around 40% thereabouts. Interest rates have skyrocketed. Isn't this just a cautionary tale for any government to really not borrow, especially in foreign currency, if it's not within your ability to pay?
So, well, of course, I mean, that's always the case, isn't it? Don't borrow unless it's within your ability. But they had bad legal advice. There should have been a collective action clause when these debts were restructured. They shouldn't have left this loose end, because frankly, it was just a loose end that never had to happen. They didn't have to reach some settlements and not others. They had bad legal advice. They spread their debt all over just different jurisdictions. Yeah, I can't even figure out how much money they owe, frankly. I couldn't research it because you can't figure it out. You know, and in fact, if we contrast this to South Africa, the way Treasury manages our external debt, it is very simple, it's very clear, it's very limited to a certain percentage of the total debt of the government. It's simple bonds. It's issued under basically one or two legal jurisdictions. It is a cautionary tale. It's exactly right. It's bad financial management and bad legal advice.
What would you do now? What would you do if you were Argentina, Andrew?
If I was Argentina, I sure as heck wouldn't pay. I mean, if I was the president of Argentina, my populace letting me... The implications, Lindsay, if they pay this one guy this money, it may mean they have to pay all the other $100 billion of lenders everything that they gave up the first time. It could be, the numbers range from paying all of the holdouts, $15 to $20 billion, or paying up all of the debt that was restructured in 2005 and 2010 up to $100 billion. I wouldn't pay this money. I wouldn't pay this money.
The people, just very briefly,
if I was the global court,
the other people that are
so
involved.
If I was the global court of justice,
yeah.
Sorry, Lindsay. If I was the global court of justice, I would exercise the wisdom of Solomon, and I'd probably cut a hedge fund manager in half.
Andrew, if that's not defaulting, then I don't know what is then. But nonetheless, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much to Andrew Canter. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Future Growth Asset Management.